come with us on a musical journey through some of the most magnificent places on earth. Great towns and cities of Europe, steeped in history and beauty, and resounding with the stories and music of the world's great composers. Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Grieg, Vivaldi, Tchaikovsky. Just some of the greats in our classical destinations. Hello, I'm Simon Callow, inviting you to join us on our musical pilgrimage to some of the most beautiful cities in Europe. We're tracing the lives of the great classical composers, looking at the places where they lived and where they wrote the music that remains as fresh today as it was when they first wrote it. But first, over to Matt and Nikki, who seem to have found themselves a rather nifty little viewpoint overlooking the Rhine.
Welcome to Classical Destinations. I'm Matt Wills.
And I'm Nikki Vasilakis, and from this hilltop we're overlooking the beautiful Rhine Valley and the city of Bonn, Germany.
Here we'll be visiting the birthplace of the man who vies with Mozart for the title Greatest Composer Who Ever Lived, Ludwig van Beethoven.
Here is today's German itinerary. We begin in Bonn, situated on the River Rhine in West Germany, not far south of Cologne. From there, we'll head north to the capital, Berlin.
In 1949, Bonn became the capital of West Germany. But critics considered it a city not worthy of being a capital. That's a bit harsh because Bonn today is a vibrant centre full of history, music and the arts.
Talking about history, there's no older place in Bonn to start than here in the Münster Basilica, completed in 1248. Today, the cathedral is a stunning example of so-called Rhenish style, particular to this part of the world. It's a transitional style between Romanesque and Gothic.
But the history of this site dates back to early Christianity on the Rhine. Excavations underneath the crypt here revealed a tomb within an enclosure which dates back to the 3rd century. Bonn's most famous son was, of course, Ludwig van Beethoven, and this statue was unveiled in 1845 on what would have been his 75th birthday.
His monumental mass, the Missa Solemnis, was performed here at the cathedral.
In attendance were Franz Liszt, who helped raise funds for the statue, French composer Hector Berlioz, the King and Queen of Prussia, and Queen Victoria and Prince Albert of Great Britain.
It must have been quite a night.
This is perhaps the most famous building in Bonn. You wouldn't know it to look at the outside. But this is the Beethoven House, the birthplace of Ludwig van Beethoven. With many original artifacts, manuscripts, documents, and memorabilia, the house, which is now a museum, is a goldmine of information on Beethoven. If you can't get there in the flesh, you can still visit online. The Beethoven House Association now has a virtual museum. Beethoven was born in 1770 and baptized in this font. He was the grandson of the Kapellmeister of the Elector's Court in Bonn. His father was a tenor in the choir who took to drink. Johannes would often come home late at night and drag the young Ludwig from his bed to physically beat music lessons into the boy.
There are also stories of Ludwig's father making him play violin to entertain his drunken friends. But in spite of these abuses, Beethoven developed a passion and sensitivity to music, that far surpassed those around him.
Beethoven performed his first concert before he was 9 and completed his first published composition by the age of 12. He was taught violin, viola, horn and clavier, and was also taught by the court organist Christian Nefer, who was a Bach enthusiast. From the age of 10, Ludwig played organ in the local church. This is the console from that organ. As part of this complex today, this stunning concert hall was built next to Beethoven's house, overlooking his garden. With wonderful acoustics, it's a featured concert venue during the annual Beethoven Festival. In 1787, Beethoven was granted paid leave from the court to study in Vienna under Mozart, who was impressed with his ability on the piano, particularly his improvisation. Mozart is believed to have said of Beethoven, "Don't forget his name. You will hear it often." He didn't stay in Vienna long, however, as he received news of his mother's illness. Shortly after he returned to Bonn, Maria Magdalena van Beethoven died from consumption. With his father increasingly under a dark cloud of alcoholism, Ludwig took hold of the family's affairs. He was granted direct access to half of his father's salary to ensure his younger brothers a measure of material security. The family lived here at Rheingasse 26 until the banks of the Rhine flooded, forcing them to move when their home was destroyed. Beethoven loved living close to the river as a young boy and went on long walks down the Rhine for inspiration and for relaxation.
This is the old town hall at the eastern end of the marketplace in Bonn. It was built in 1738, and a number of influential people have addressed the crowds from the top of these stairs. Charles de Gaulle did so in 1962, John F. Kennedy the following year. And many, many years later, the great Nelson Mandela of South Africa spoke to the people also.
This Rococo building and its predecessor on this site has been both the seat of government for the city and a meeting place for its people for over 700 years.
The old Inn Em Hootje has been around for hundreds of years. It's right next to the old town hall in Bonn, and it used to be a favourite haunt of Beethoven, who'd come here and wine and dine and dance until the early hours with his good friend Babette.
In 1792, the Elector released Beethoven from his duties and granted him a scholarship to study in Vienna under Joseph Haydn. His teacher was supposed to have been Mozart, but sadly, Mozart had died the year before at the age of 35. Haydn and Beethoven first met in July 1792 here in La Redoute, a ballroom, casino and concert hall built in Bonn for Prince Archbishop Max Franz and completed that same year. These days, the Beethoven Hall here serves as a venue for congresses, balls and concerts.
On his departure, Beethoven's friends gave him an album in which they wrote their best wishes.
His friend Ferdinand Count Waldstein wrote this comment. Dear Beethoven, you are about to travel to Vienna in fulfillment of your long-cherished wishes. The genius of Mozart is still weeping and mourning over the death of her pupil. She found a refuge, but no occupation, in the inexhaustible Haydn. Through him she wishes to form a union with another. With the help of assiduous labor you shall receive Mozart's spirit from Haydn's hands. And so off Beethoven went to Vienna in 1792, a young man full of prospects, acclaimed as a brilliant young virtuoso, ready to study with the world's most famous composer, and only 22. What followed should have been a golden catalogue of success. To us, from a distance of 2 centuries, it was. He became Beethoven after all. But being Beethoven was a far from a comfortable experience, and not just for him. He's a classic example of the artist who doesn't quite fit into the world. Deaf, tragedy of tragedies for a musician, prone to falling in love with women above his station, appallingly bad-tempered, and chronically restless. He lived in 33 lodgings over the next 35 years. Alas, poor Ludwig. He paid the price of being absolutely and completely his own man. And as a composer, having easily mastered all the rules, he felt impelled to reinvent them. Take the Moonlight Sonata, for example. The title, by the way, is not Beethoven's, but for once it rather hits the nail on the head. It's a piece that he dedicated to yet another woman with whom he fell in love and to whom marriage was unthinkable, the Contessa Giulietta Ducati. The so-called Moonlight is in the dreamy first movement, which immediately breaks the so-called rules, beginning a piano sonata with a slow movement instead of something fast and attention-grabbing. Beethoven proves that there are more ways than one to be arresting, casting a spell that has lasted from that day to this, and shows no sign of ever failing to do so. Beethoven never returned to Bonn, but the city doesn't hold it against him. Members of the Beethoven family have stayed in the area, becoming winemakers near the Mosel River. That's right, there's a Beethoven wine, and you can drink it during the city's Beethoven Festival, held here every September and featuring artists and orchestras from around the world. The festival's director is Ilona Schmiel.
Oh, it has a great history. It was founded in 1845 because it was the birthday, the 75th birthday of Ludwig van Beethoven, and it was under the direction of Franz Liszt. We figured out the relations of Beethoven's lifetime, other composers in Prague, in Brno, for example, with whom he had very strong relationships and who influenced him. But also, for example, Mozart was before him in Prague, and they had there some influences together. So this means to find some ways to bring Beethoven in a more and new and modern position during his lifetime, but also the influences and the roots for other composers who came after him. You will feel all these very hard things he meant, and also the situation of the unsterbliche Geliebte, for example. We don't really know if it's something like a fairy tale, if there was really a person who he admired very much, but especially in this field he wasn't so very successful in the personal way. So I think you can feel this, and this is one of the things which you can hear during his works.
Industry and commerce is part of the lifeblood of Bonn, but most people come here for the famous Museum Mile.
Places to visit along the Museum Mile include Bonn Art Museum with a stunning 20th century collection. The newest museum in the city is the Deutsches Museum Bonn, which specializes in contemporary German research and technology, including many Nobel Prize-winning discoveries. Museum König is a natural history museum par excellence, with a special emphasis on ecology.
But one of the most interesting is the German Contemporary History Museum.
With 5 levels of rampways, the museum uses multimedia to trace the entire post-World War II history of Germany. When the wall came down and Germany was again unified, a decision was taken in 1991 to relocate the federal government to Berlin. It could have been devastating for Bonn, with the loss of income and jobs, but the government handed over 1.7 billion euros to sweeten the medicine and help Bonn forge a new identity.
It seems to have paid off because over the last 15 years or so, dozens and dozens of international organizations and companies have been attracted to Bonn, including 12 UN offices, which is something of a coup for the city because it makes it the only United Nations base in Germany.
More to the point, in a recent opinion poll, Bonn ranked highest for being the most livable city in Germany. And so to Germany's capital, Berlin, a new city in every way. It is still in the middle of a massive phase of redevelopment and lacks so much of the architectural heritage of the other German cities we've seen on our travels so far. The energy of Berlin's evolution today makes it one of the most exciting cities in the world. Berlin is also indisputably one of the world centers for classical music. There are 3 full-time opera houses here and several professional symphony orchestras, including the one regarded as the world's finest, the Berlin Philharmonic. This is the Reichstag. Of all the buildings in this city, it is probably the most symbolic. In 1933, the building was set on fire and a Dutch communist, Van der Lubbe, was arrested for the offense.
During World War II, the Opera House was destroyed twice by bombing. But when it was finally reopened in 1945, Wagner's opera, The Master Singers of Nuremberg, was top of the bill. But of all the symbols of Berlin, the Brandenburg Gate is surely the strongest. It was modelled on the entrance to the Acropolis in Athens. When Napoleon invaded in the early 1800s, he had it dismantled and taken to Paris. But when he was defeated, it was brought back here and in 1814 declared a symbol of victory.
Not much of pre-war Berlin survives, but this is an exception. Nikolai Viertel, or the Nikolai Quarter, is one of the oldest parts of Berlin. It consists of entirely newly built replicas of historic buildings. Even the Nikolaikirche was destroyed. All that remains of the original is the base of the facade along here, originally built in about 1300. In this whole area, only one Baroque building survived the war undamaged. Just this unassuming townhouse, built in 1759 for the Knoblauch family. Checkpoint Charlie, so named because it was the third border post in the Greater Berlin area. The other two were Alpha and Bravo. Its main function was to check and inform visitors traveling from west to east.
But now the Berlin Wall is fading, both as an edifice and in the social conscience. But there are still some poignant reminders.
These 1,065 crosses commemorate those who attempted to flee from east to west but didn't make it. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and on Christmas Day of that year, Leonard Bernstein conducted a concert in Berlin to celebrate the event. They played, of course, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Bernstein changed one word of the choral finale so that the Ode to Joy became the Ode to Freedom. By the way, Beethoven's Ninth determined the length of a CD when the technology was being developed. The new format had to be long enough to contain the entire symphony, about 75 minutes. You see, classical music can change the world. So from Berlin, we have come to the end of our travels here in Germany. Be sure to join us for our final episode, when we travel back to St. Petersburg. We will be reflecting on the music and lives of Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky and Dmitri Shostakovich, two of Russia's finest composers and one of the most remarkable cities in Europe. So from Nikki, Matt and me, Simon Callow, join us next in St. Petersburg. And all of that in our next classical destinations. See you then. I'm Simon Callow.